Now is it working? Oh, all right. We need to put this thing out here. Okay, well, thanks for coming, you guys. I'm Kira. I'm just a regular person. Just a regular person who has gone through it, and come back up and still kind of going through it, right? Because life just doesn't stop. I don't know about y'all, but it doesn't give me a break. So we are talking about navigating depression today and finding hope. And so I got notes to keep myself on track. Otherwise, I will sometimes while out. So I'm going to try not to do that. So I see a lot of new faces, so I'm just going to give you just a brief introduction of kind of where I've been. So let's see. Well, let's see. At my bottom, I was homeless, addicted to heroin, turning tricks, doing everything that I could to get high, basically. I don't know about y'all, but been there, done that, waste of time. So I came to the end of myself and really figured, this is not what I want out of life at all. And when you get to that point, there's definitely opportunities to start making some decisions, right? So God is good, and he found me there, and he has been cleaning me up and put me back together for some time now. It's been 10 years since I've used heroin. Praise the Lord. Yeah, I know. I'm like, thanks so much. Sometimes I talk about it, and I'm like, I don't even know who that person was. Yeah, right? Isn't that? Yeah. So the longer we walk towards, redemption, the longer we walk towards, the opposite direction that we were running towards before, right? We find ourselves further and further away, which is so cool. So navigating depression, finding hope. So we're going to talk about cycles, because once we see cycles, it definitely helps us recognize them, break them, do something different, right? So we're going to look at our interactions between thoughts, desires, our bodies, our feelings, and then the cycle of despair and hope. So how we can better recognize patterns and stop the descent into depression. So what is depression? It is a condition of general emotional deduction or withdrawal, sadness greater and more prolonged than that warranted by any objective reason. So it's that long, ongoing, heavy feeling that's like, I can't shake this, right? And it looks different pretty much for everybody. But it's important to notice what it looks like for you when it shows up, and start to pinpoint those things because we all have our own personal cycles too. So what are some factors or causes? Physiological imbalances, spiritual issues, or both. So physiology is the branch of biology that's dealing with the physical, all of the chemistry processes, the physical processes, everything that is the physical makeup. So just a couple facts about how many people in the U.S. are actually dealing with depression. It's kind of wild. In 2021, 21 million people reported having symptoms of depression in the U.S. alone, which is about 10% of the population. That's pretty wild, right? So that was a couple of years ago. Our recent numbers, you guys, I was looking this up, and I was like, this is kind of disgusting. 14% of women and 14% of men in the U.S. reported symptoms in the last year, and 20% of youth ages 12 to 17. I'm like, isn't that crazy, you guys? 23% of adults in the past year alone, which is about 60 million people. It's wild. Groups that are LGBTQ teens are 6 times more likely to experience symptoms of depression than non-LGBTQ identifying teens. So we're going to look at why, some of that is. So people with the highest rate of depressions are between the ages of 12 and 25, which those are our formative years, right? But once we move into who we are, and we start looking at because I'm outside of that bracket. I don't know about y'all, but I'm outside of that bracket. But we start to become who we are, and then we live our lives out of who we are, right? So like our formative years, like the experiences we go through, the people we interact with, the thought processes that we adapt to live our lives out of, right? Like it all plays a part. And we're going to look at that. So I've got some love notes here for myself. See if I can. Okay, so what does it look like? The physical expressions include changes in appetite, sleeping patterns, concentration, sexual desire, fatigue, all of that. The spiritual expression then is feelings of being overwhelmed or irritable, not being able to concentrate, self-pity, hopelessness, grief, sense of failure, ingratitude, guilt, and etc. So not to say like if you feel these ways, like you're just depressed, right? Like it's not like that, because we all have emotions that we experience, but oftentimes when those emotions go unchecked, right, and they are prolonged, then it becomes not just like something that you're feeling, but kind of like a state of being, right? Like you're really living out of that. So we're gonna go back. Okay, so before we get too crazy, we have to talk about worldview. So we can't not talk about worldview. So worldview is two things. It's your paradigm. It's how you see the world, right? But it answers two questions: what you believe about God and what you believe about man. And everything comes down to these two questions. Everything. So, for instance, if you believe that God is unloving, doesn't care about you, and that man is basically good, let's just go with that. It gets messy in a hurry. So if I think that God doesn't care about me, but that somehow in my own strength I can figure it out, but I think maybe all of you can recognize, like, how many times have you tried to get it right and you just fail again and again and again, and it's like nothing you can do, nothing you do is gonna make it right? And so that doesn't really work as a worldview. But when we look at God as loving and that man is sinful, and we recognize that in and of our own strength, like we just don't have it, but that there is a loving God who's willing to supply us with that, with what we need, then it changes everything, right? So I'm just going to pray and welcome him to this place right now. So, Father God, I thank you for this opportunity, God, to just be here, to share my heart, to share the experiences, God, that you've brought me through, to give insight and understanding in the things that you've taught me through the cycles of despair and hope. And I ask, God, that you would be here with us, that you would be honored and glorified above all else, and that you would help our hearts to be open in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so I'm going to draw you guys some pictures. It's pretty much everything I do includes pictures. Yeah, it's funny because I have an 8-year-old, and he's so sweet because if I don't understand something, like say something's broken on my car and my husband's trying to like tell me what it is, he'll draw me a picture. So my 8-year-old will be like, "Do you need me to draw you a picture?" And I'm like, "Yes, thank you." Like, how do you know? So, okay, so we're gonna start with this here. I just remember last time I was here. It's been a couple years since I've been here to speak, actually, and I'm so honored to have the opportunity to come and be a part. Like I said, you guys, I haven't seen many of your faces, so it's exciting that we can be back. I can't negate the fingers, sorry. I can't not draw the fingers. And last time I drew a picture, nobody knew I'm actually an artist. So they're like, "What is that?" I was like, "I'm an artist for real." Okay, so this is our person. And we've got, I'm gonna draw all this and then I'll tell you what's up. How about that?
Sounds great.
Cool. Appreciate it. All right. Okay. I'm going to draw another picture while I'm at it. Okay. Okay, so we talked about worldview, what we believe about God, and what we believe about man. And now this is the heart-body interaction. So this is just a great visual to see, like, right, it's all connected. Here is our heart, and we have standards, we have values, treasures, and desires. Right? We all do, right? Yeah. So this is our thinking, our body, and our feelings. And then here in our heart we have standards, values, treasures, and desires. So what is a standard? It's a rule or a principle that is used as a basis for judgment, morals, ethics, habits established by authority, custom, and or an individual. Values, a person's principle or standard of behavior, one's judgment of what is important in life. I'm sure you guys all know what this is, but I'm a words person, just like I'm a pictures person. So sometimes I'll take words and I'll look them up just because I think I might understand something, and then I'm like, oh, I didn't know that, you know? So there's always opportunities for greater learning. Treasures, something we value highly. And our desires are strong feelings of wanting to have something or wishing for something to happen. Okay, makes sense, right? So the Word of God says in Proverbs 4:23, guard your heart above all else, for out of it flows the wellspring of life. So right here, we've got our heart, and this is where things get really messy, right? Yeah. So all of our attitudes and actions come out of the heart and mind. This is what is conceived in the mind that gives birth to our actions. It even becomes the passion and eventually issues, both in words and action. So, what does that look like? We need to be watchmen. So I'm going to put this here because I'm going to come back to it. Watchman. What does it mean to be a watchman? You guys are going to have to follow me because I kind of do this. Okay, so understanding depression in light of creation. The heart initiates lifestyle choices. We saw that in Proverbs 4:23, right? That out of the heart flows the wellspring of life. So the heart initiates choices. The body is then the instrument that the heart uses to make expression, right? We see this then, so I'm just going to put this here for y'all. In Romans 6, is it 21? Oh, 11 through 13. Okay, so Romans 6, 11 through 13 says, do not offer any parts of your body as instruments of unrighteousness. And then also, I'm going to put it here. Matthew 12:34 says, from out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Okay, so we got a lot going on. We're thinking our thoughts, we're using our body, we're making expressions, and we're having feelings, right? And it all comes back to what's happening in our heart. So what does that mean for depression? Well, when we're not thinking thoughts that are in alignment with truth, we're probably not making choices that are in alignment with truth, right? And our feelings aren't reflecting then that either, what's in alignment with truth. So this is the big picture right here. This is the one that I want to show you. And we come, I'm going to do this. So here are the desires. And we've got up here our Mr. Man. That's him. He's looking a maybe. We'll put his eyeballs level. There's 4 stages to the descent of depression, and this is really what we need to watch. So first we have disappointments. So we all have circumstances that we go through in life, right? You lose your job, your car breaks down, your chickens get out. Those are my problems. Something happens, and we have a couple choices. We automatically have thoughts, right? Thoughts usually come first, and sometimes we're moving so fast that we can't even recognize like what comes first. Like, did I think something or was I feeling something first? And we kind of get carried away sometimes where it's like this thought comes, and then this feeling comes, and then this thought comes, and then it just kind of spirals out of control, and next thing you know, you're down here, you're like, man, I'm really disappointed. So number 1 is disappointment. Now, disappointment looks like confusion, sadness, grief, unfulfilled desires, expectations, etc. This is something that I get hung up on a lot. I have recognized in my life, especially, that I have really unrealistic expectations. Really unrealistic expectations. And when I don't recognize that my expectation is off, especially, it's really easy for me to be disappointed because I will like make something up like, oh, it's gonna be like this, and oh, that's gonna go like that, and that's gonna be great over here. And then we get there and it's like, okay, wait, hold on a second. None of that happened the way that I wanted it to, right? But my expectation was like way up here when reality is like, actually, this is where we're gonna meet it, right? And that's just kind of the way it happens sometimes. Now, for me personally, I will have unrealistic expectations. So I don't know about y'all, but just me. So, okay, so discontentment then. Maybe I should have made these lines longer so y'all could see. We'll just put a couple colors up in here. So this is disappointment. Wow, that is a color right there. Sorry, Mr. Man, you're in the way. Okay. So if we don't address disappointment, we start to slide down to discontentment.
Very quick question.
Yeah.
So isn't it like a wise tale then? Because I mean, when I was growing up, it was like, oh, you need to experience some disappointment. You know what I mean? Anybody else ever had that? You know what I mean? To grow.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that's a wives' tale, and I'm going to tell you why I agree. No, that's okay. That's okay. That's allowed. So disappointments, yeah, they're inevitable, right? Like it's not just having unrealistic expectation. Like disappointments are just going to happen. I mean, we go through trials and we have choices to make within the trials. And when we make wrong choices, like that's when we start to like really fall. It's like I can get hung up. Like my buddy, her car broke down today. Like she had a choice. Love you, bud. She had a choice right there. She could have been like, gosh, darn it, my car, like it's been running great. And then all of a sudden it just breaks down. Like, oh, I know I should have bought a new car like 3 weeks ago. Like she could have been ruminating about this thing and like pitching a fit, right? That's not my buddy. That's not her. But she had an opportunity to be like, you know what? I've been needing a new car, and I'm pretty sure now's the time. Like, I didn't have a good reason really to get a new car because this one still runs, but now it doesn't. So what could have been like a really big bummer, right? A disappointment with the right frame of mind is actually an opportunity, right? So James actually says, count it all joy, dear brothers and sisters, when you face trials of various kinds, for it is the very thing that produces in you steadfastness, and steadfastness is the thing that causes you then to be mature and complete, lacking nothing. And so when we are persevering, right, when we've got a mindset that's like, I'm not going to let this car breaking down stop me. I'm going places still. Like, I've got stuff to do. God's going to make a way. And now, I mean, you got to have sure footing. What are you standing on, right? If you're not standing on the promises of the word, if you're not standing on what is truth, then you're riding a slippery slope, because this is the place where we start to believe lies. So what is it that you're thinking on that is actually not in alignment with truth, right? You're my example, sorry, bud. I know. So if she didn't believe that God was good, and she believed that God didn't care, I mean, right there, you're without hope, right? Like, I'm alone in this. Like, who do I have that's going to come to my rescue right now? Like, sure, I could call, this person, or I could call that person, but, like, they might be, doing their own thing. But, like, when we trust in and we rely on and we adhere to truth, and that is our hope then, I mean, it makes a way. Like, we can go through things that are ugly, like really ugly, and it's our sure footing. So being willing to persevere and be refined through the trials, it's a mark of maturity. Now, it doesn't just come like that. It's grown, right? And it's grown through continually showing up, being willing to address, okay, where am I off here? What is it that I'm thinking that is actually not truth? And then being willing to address that thing. Like, if you're willing to do that and you're doing it regularly and you get good at it by knowing yourself and recognizing, like, hold on a second, that's a lie, I'm not doing that, then you can stay right here and you can work it out. But when you are deceived, right, which is like believing a lie, you start to move into discontentment. So disappointment turns into discontentment, which looks like bitterness. It looks like brooding anger. It starts to become not just the thing that you're thinking on, but now it's like the disposition and the attitude in which you live your life out of, right? So now it starts to like really affect the people around you, how you're interacting. So I had a situation, I had a situation in my marriage that I didn't address some disappointments that were really deep. And I told the Lord, I was like, we're just not going to talk about that. Like, it's just too big. I don't want to go there right now. Like, it's heavy. Like, and I ignored it for a long time. And when you ignore a problem, I don't know about y'all, but that problem will rear its head at some point, and it will show up and be like, decide now. So that's what happened for me, is it came to a point in my marriage where it was like, here's the crossroad. And I was like, oh no. Oh my gosh, there it is. And it came to this place of I was so bitter about something that, all right, so I'm just going to keep it real with y'all. So I have one child. Okay, I'm a mother to one, and I'm very blessed to have one child. This child was promised me by the Lord. And there's nothing like being a mom. There's nothing like it. So, but for a long time, I wanted more children. And it was like a really hard thing. Like, I was like, well, what the heck, Lord? Like, aren't I supposed to? He told me years ago, he's like, I'm going to make you a mother of many. And I was like, okay, well, like, how many babies we talking here? I'm like, I don't know how many I can have. And he told me that and then promised me one child. I received my child, and I knew then, and I don't know about you guys, but like, when God promises you something, and then he actually does what he says he's going to do, and he shows up for you, and it wrecks you, and you're like, oh, you're so good. Thank you. You actually said what you were going to do. That's where faith is birthed, you guys. It's that place where it's like faith just shows up, it kicks the door, and it's like, hello, here we are, right? And you're standing on something then. So that's what it was like for me. I remember holding my son weeping, like literally just weeping day in and day out, like weeping. And I remember, and it's funny because he just reminded me about this, especially because my kid's 8, and he'd be wiling out sometimes, and God will be like, remember when you held him and you would just weep because you were so happy that I showed up for you and fulfilled the promise that I made? And I'd be like, yeah, yeah. So anyways, I have one child, and for years I wanted another child. And there was a situation in my marriage where we had come to a place where there was a promise made, like, yep, we can have more children. Great. Let's pursue that. We're going along the track. All of a sudden, my husband changed his mind, didn't tell me. We're going along the track. And I'd come back again, like once a month usually. Hey, for years. What happened? I thought we were going to have more babies. What's the problem here, And I started to become discontent in my relationship with having one child. Like, these are like big things, right? In your life, like my life. So I started to become discontent. And discontentment is a dissatisfaction with what is happening in our lives, what God is doing. And there was a crossroads. Basically, my husband said to me, he said, if you need to have more children, you can go and have more children, but it's not going to be with me. And I was like, but I love you. And he wasn't like, like, I don't love you, he was like, this is a really hard thing for a woman to sacrifice in her life. Like, if you need that, I release you. And I was like, what are we doing right now? like, why are you doing this? So that's a hard thing. So I stopped, and I was like, we're going to come back to this, because this is not a decision we make flippantly. Like, whoa. And I took some time, and I started to address my heart. I started to address the things that I had desired, the thinking that I had, the feelings that I had concerning that, like as if my one child that God promised to me wasn't enough. Now, I mean, you can have one baby, you can have 15 babies. God is good. Like, whatever he allows for you is what he allows for you. For me, though, this is what I thought I needed, right? So it was the desire of my heart that started to see, and my husband has good reasons. Don't discredit the man. He's a good man. Love him. Still married. So he had good reasons. He's like, I work out of town a lot. Like, hey, we've got this. Like, we both came out of addiction, and we're like, we're just glad we're alive, like, and we have a child. Like, this is good, like, we don't have to get crazy here. Like, we don't have to have 15 babies. It's okay. Like, this is good. So he had some good reasons, and I heard him, and I took my heart to the Lord, and I had to ask him a question then that I did not want to ask him. I refused to ask the Lord for a long time. And finally I said to him, the Lord, I said, I want to ask you a question, but I'm afraid of what you're going to say, so I'm not going to ask you. And he's like, okay. And then I'm like, but I want to ask you because I have to know what you're going to say because, we're at a crossroads and I'm discontent. And so I'm going to ask. And he's like, okay. God is good. It's a still small whisper, right? It's that gentle voice. And so I asked the Lord, I said, am I supposed to have more children? Am I supposed to birth more children? And he said, no. And so I wept, right? And I recognized, like, that my desire, although it wasn't wrong necessarily, it became an idol of my heart. It started sitting on the throne and dictating then the attitude and the disposition in which I treated the people around me. Because how it came about was my husband's like, what the heck's your problem? He's like, you're always mad at me. You're always like angry and bitter. And I'm like, I don't know, And then finally I was like, well, you know about the babies, right? And then it came out. And he's like, that's a big thing, crossroads, right? So then went to the Lord. He's like, nope, you're not having more babies. And I was like, oh, okay. It's kind of what I thought you'd say. That's why I was afraid to ask. But here we are. Now I know. So I'm like, okay, and it's because that's not what you have for me. Like there's something else that I'm going to be doing. There's other ways that I can, fulfill this desire, this longing to have, a greater lineage, whatever that looks like, right? God's going to work it out. But you come out of that with truth then. So I went and I got truth, something that I was standing on. Okay, this isn't for me. That means that something else is, right? Because where there's a no, there's an open door. So, so that's just something in my life, right? It's a real situation in my life that I actually had to adjust this summer. That was not long ago. And on the other side of it, I'm like, you know what? I'm good. God is still good. So, yeah. So from discontentment, right? This is our attitudes and our disposition now. That starts to affect how we interact with people. And it was for me. If not addressed, it turns into despair, which is essentially hopelessness. Now, what is hope? Right? What is it? Yeah. Yeah. Hope is a joyful, confident expectation of something good. It's like having a seed. You're like, this is going to grow. I'm going to plant it and it's going to grow. I just know because this seed, that's what they do. You put them in the ground and that's what they do, right? It's like that. Exactly. It's very much tied to faith. It's that expectation of something good. It's trust. It is a firm foundation. It's the thing we stand on. So when we don't have it, and how do I help you guys understand? We can have, okay, we're going to take a pause. We're going to go here. So there's four basic areas of wellness. Now, I don't know if you all are familiar with the wellness wheel. I spoke on it a couple years ago about a wellness wheel, and it covers 7 areas of wellness. But this is more of like a basic, right? So there's emotional, physical, social, and physical wellness. Oh, I wrote physical twice. I'm like, wait a second, which one am I missing? Physical, emotional, social. Lord, help. I'm like, spiritual, yeah, thanks. Goodness. Thank you. Okay, so 4 basic areas of wellness. And we can have hope. Like, this is something that the Lord has been working out in my heart, is like, there are areas of our lives, right? Like, some areas we have more faith in, and we have more promises that we're standing on, like more sure-footedness, right, about things that what we're standing on, our hope. And then there's areas or there's circumstances that we go through where it's like, okay, so side note. I asked the Lord one time, this is maybe only funny to me, but I asked the Lord one time, he was talking about like his house, the body, right? And I asked him, I said, like, what part am I? And he said, you're a window. I said, like a window? Thanks. And it's funny because every time I share something, he's like cuts straight to the heart of whatever it is. He's like, It's like hanging your dirty laundry out. Like, he just, like, puts me in places where it's like, there's my dirty laundry for everyone to see. And that's just, I'm a window. So, but here's the thing, right? Like, I don't have any shame. Like, whatever. Like, I can tell you, like, hey, I'm not having any more babies. Big whoop. Like, God is still good, right? Like, that's my business, but I can share that knowing that you're going to get something, right? So, I'm a window. And we can have areas of hope, right? So, for instance, my husband got hurt at work about a year ago. And we live off of one income. I'm a homeschool mom. And so I was like, what are you doing getting hurt at work? That's not allowed. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm not trying to. I'm like, well, good. He works construction. And so he explained to me, he's like, I'm lifting these 2,000-pound panels out of a boom lift that's like, I was like, you don't even have adequate space to lift with your glutes. Like, what kind of working environment is this? I'm just giving him a hard time. I'm like, don't you know how to lift with your glutes? Yeah. Anyways, he hurt his back, and he needed to have a back surgery then. And I was like, that is so not allowed. Who's going to pay our bills? And he's like, yeah, I know, it's pretty, your bills aren't going to get paid. Oh, no. Like, never mind my back, right? So anyways, he's like going through this for some time. And I'm praying the whole time. I'm like, Lord, what the heck are you doing? Like, what is going on? Like, you told me to homeschool. Like, I'm out here, just hanging on to the hem. Like, what about the income? Like, what are you doing? And I just was like, he just kept telling me, he's like, just trust me, But at the time, my husband was working out of town. And my son and I had been praying. I mean, my son's like in tears. He's like, I just want my dad to be home. He's gone all the time. I can't see him. Like, who's going to teach me how to be a man? Like, I don't know about y'all, but like when you're a mom and you're hearing that and you're like, it's like, I'm not crying, you're crying. Like, oh my gosh, I can't teach you how to be a man. I don't even know what that means. So I'm like, we're praying and we're going before the Lord and we're like, you got to do something, God. Bring him home. Like, you got to do something, And so throughout this time, he's going to doctor after doctor after doctor, and it's just not getting better. And it's, it's like we're going on 6 months, 9 months. Like, okay, well, now he needs a surgery. Okay, well, what does that look like? So we get that figured out, and the whole time, I'm like freaking out. Internally, I am freaking out. I'm like, what happens when he gets a surgery? Like, what if they, mess up and, he's paralyzed and I'll have to go back to work and I'm going to have to, lift him? And, and he's too young to be this old. I'm like, no. So I'm freaking out. And the whole time I'm taking my heart before the Lord because, I can't freak out in front of my husband all the time. Like, sometimes I have to let him think like I got it together. He knows better. So I'm going before the Lord, and in that time, he has a surgery, and then he's home. And what's funny, I guess, is we were talking about the baby thing. Like, he comes home. He's home all the time. This is new. Like, oh, my gosh, what do we do? I was like, this changes everything. Like, you eat so much. I'm like, oh my gosh, and he wants me to make him dinner all the time now. So I'm like, okay. But then we come to this place of, right, we have these really hard conversations about the babies and, everything. And God starts to, work out some really hard things in our marriage. And it's good. It's hard, but it's good. And so he's home all the time. And then we're praying about work, and all of a sudden, I had come to the Lord, and I was like, Lord, what are we going to do? Our finances are, coming to an end here. I'm like, do I need to go back to work? Am I supposed to give him time off to heal? I have an education. I'm like, I can go and, make money. It's just, that's not what God asked me to do. He's asked me to homeschool my child. And it challenges me because I tend to get self-righteous. like try to do things in my own strength, right? All the time. That's my tendency. So he's home, and we're praying, and I go to the Lord, and I'm like, am I supposed to go back to work? And he says to me, be still and know that I am God. And I said, okay, what does that look like? And I'm like, be still, be still. So do nothing? I'm like, literally, do nothing? And all of a sudden, it was like perfect peace. I had perfect peace. And I was like, this is so wild. I'm like, he's just going to work it out. I'm like, all right. So I come home from like a worship thing, and my husband says, hey, I'm going to go back to work. I'm ready now. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, I didn't even, I wasn't going to ask him. I wasn't going to tell him, I was just going to let it be. And he says, I'm going to call the foreman, this and that. And then he tells him, this is what I want. I want to be home every night. This is what I want. And mind you, my son and I have been praying. And then the foreman calls him, hey, there's an opportunity. You can go here. It's 9 hours away. My husband says no. Even though it's more money, he says no. And then the foreman calls back again. He said, hey, there's 2 jobs. Both of them are local. You can be home every night. Here it is. 3 years, my husband had been on the road. And through this really crazy circumstance of getting hurt, not having a resolution from doctors, having a surgery, coming home, all of a sudden now he's deposited back into our everyday life, and we got the very thing we had been asking for. Now, from my perspective, it was not looking like God was doing what I was asking him to do. It was looking like a whole bunch of other problems, right? But when my husband said, hey, this is the job I took, I'm going to be home every night, I literally was like, that is the favor of God. I said, I have been praying. I have been praying for this. Our son has been praying, and he just did exactly the thing that I asked him to. And my husband was like, yeah. Really? Yeah. So, pushing through trials, tribulations, continuing to try to finding that hope, something to stand on. When we reach out, and I said to God, what are you doing? What am I supposed to do? And he said, be still. He gave me a word to stand on. I said, okay, then I'll do that. Because whatever I was going to do in my own strength would have thrown a huge wrench into things. So despair is hopelessness. It's seeing no way out, giving up on responsibilities. So this can look like a lot of things. I'm not going to work. I'm not going to pay my bills. I'm not going to, I'm not showing up to life. It can look like a lot of things. And then we move down into destructiveness. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I lived down here for a long time. And this looks like, you know what it says. That looks like maybe you're suicidal, maybe you're homicidal, you're living out of a critical spirit, hostility, right? Impulsivity. So let's just talk about that for a minute. So in addiction, this is where we live, right? That's where we live. We might not be hell-bent on I'm going to go home and, off myself, but every day we're, sticking needles in our arms or, we're getting high or whatever. We're essentially pursuing suicide, right? It's a slow death. Sometimes it goes from slow to really fast, right? But it's that place of destructiveness, and that's where we live when we are making those choices. Now we come back to where our standards, our values, our treasures, our desires are. This place right here is one of the most selfish places you could live because it has absolutely no regard for anybody else. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of reasons why people experience depression. Let's just back up for a minute. Are there medical concerns? Is there a neurological issue? Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, like multiple sclerosis, some really big, heavy stuff, right? Now that's a hard situation to walk through. Not impossible, though, to stay out of this cycle even though you're going through some of those things. Does that make sense? And I can say that because I've seen it. Are there hormonal issues? PMS? I laugh because once a month, I'm here going through this cycle. And I'm like, my husband is like, I think it's like 5 days. And I'm like, that's just, or he'll be like, I'm pretty sure in like the next 12 hours, you're gonna get your period. I'm like, oh, wow, thanks, buddy. Appreciate the time on that.
I just said that yesterday.
Yeah.
He goes, aren't we getting into those days? I was like, maybe.
Yeah. So I've asked, and I'm like, why the heck do you do that? It irks me. And he's like, well, I just want you to see the pattern that once a month it happens again. I'm like, I know this is out of a heart of love, but could you maybe like not look at your pretend wristwatch and count down on your clock of my hormonal discomfort, please? I'd really greatly appreciate that. He's like, well, I'm just wanting you to be aware. I'm like, yeah, love you too. Appreciate it. So you get it. Yeah, you get it. Okay, so these are real things, though, that affect, how we're processing information, though, right? It's a real thing. It's a real thing. So, okay. Did I take a pause somewhere I was supposed to come back to? Because I feel like I did. We could talk about the watchman. We could come back here. Okay, so what does it mean to be a watchman? So if we're guarding our hearts, because out of it the wellspring of life flows, right? And we're to be watchmen, what are we watching? What are we watching? Anybody have any ideas? Yes. In the back? Yes. Yeah. Yes. You bet. Because we're accountable, right? We're accountable for the things that we think on. We're accountable for our feelings. We're accountable for the way we behave. We're accountable for the things that we allow to rule our hearts. But when we're down here, we are like not even thinking about any of this stuff, right? Like we're not thinking about what we're thinking about. We're not thinking about how we're feeling, except for like, oh, I just need to get high, right? Like, well, stop, pause, take a minute. Why? Like why? What for? Like what is it that you think is so necessary to like, right? Get there? So, I mean, when you start asking some questions, like ask yourself some questions, man, that's really where work starts to happen, like asking really good questions. Okay, so addressing disappointment. Disappointment isn't necessarily sin. It's just not getting something that we think we deserve or getting something that we think we don't deserve. And that's the place where we really need to be watchmen, is when situations, circumstances, trials come, and it's like, okay, how am I going to respond to this? Because that's the thing that we're accountable for. If we're wise, which I think we want to be, right? That's why we need information and we want to grow, is because we want to get better at this thing that we're doing here. So if we're wise, we're going to ask ourselves, like, what are the things that I treasure? What are the desires of my heart that actually rule and reign? Sometimes, like, my husband asked me this question one time. He said, do you care more about being right or being kind? And I was like, ouch. I was like, ouch, that one hurt. I was like, being right, sorry. And I had to recognize, I was like, wow, I'm like more concerned actually with being right sometimes than I am about how other people feel. Like, come on, man. That's not how we treat people, right? Yeah. But here's the thing, right? If we don't have people around us to like help us be accountable, Like, my husband is very blunt. He will just like, and God knew I needed that. So I'm thankful for it. But we need people that are willing to speak truth to us and ask us hard questions, because people that allow us to just like stay stuck, like they're actually not helping us at all, right? People that aren't willing to ask you hard questions, people that aren't willing to challenge why you're doing something, especially when they see that it's destructive, like, why are we allowing them say so in our lives? You know? Okay, so the desires is a big one, because we can manipulate, we can sin, we can compromise our character to get it. And James 1:13-15 says, when you are tempted, don't ever say that God is tempting me, for God is incapable of being tempted by evil, and he is never the source of temptation. Instead, it is each person's own desire and thoughts that drag them into evil and lure or hook them by the bait of evil from their own desires and lure them away into darkness. Evil desires give birth to evil actions, and when sin is fully mature, it gives birth to death. So addressing where our desires is huge. And oftentimes when we go through hard things, like, that's the first thing that we need to check, right, is our heart. Like, I have this expression that I say to my friend all the time. I'm like, I'm dealing with my heart right now. Like, something happened, and I'm feeling, jacked up in some type of way, and I'm like, I'm dealing with my heart right now in this thing, And she gets it, because she's like, yeah, you need to do that, buddy. Like, something's not right there, And she says the same to me. I'm dealing with my heart right now about this. And I'm just so thankful. Like, I have a friend who I can go to and say, like, I'm feeling this way. I'm thinking this. This was the circumstance. And, I'm dealing with my heart. And she's willing to speak truth to me. She's like, well, why? Or what? Or what did God say about that? Where's the truth that you're standing on? It's like, that's invaluable. I can't put a price on it. But that's another promise that God gave to me. I said, I need this. And he gave me that. So, I'm not emotional, you are. Don't look at me. Don't look at me. Okay. So when we allow disappointments to turn to bitterness, it leads to contentment. And now we have our attitude and disposition. And if we're not still addressing it, we move to despair and destructiveness, right? So how do we get out of the pit? How do we get out of the pit? First, it's being willing to address, right, the lies that we believe, so we can pedal back and replace them with truth. So it's important to address lies, right? But if we don't replace it with truth, then we're still not standing on anything. We're just there with the lie we believe. So next week, we're going to talk about the importance of journaling and other expressions, which I'm excited about, because this is a tool that I use, especially in just like managing this internal space and this process. And so I'm excited to kind of share with you guys what that looks like. So what is hope, right? So we talked about that confident, joyful expectation of something good happening. Harvard Medical School put out a study in 2021 saying that among young adults with chronic illnesses, greater degrees of hope are associated with improved coping, well-being, and engagement in healthy behaviors. It also protects against depression and suicide. Among teens, hope is linked with health, quality of life, self-esteem, and a sense of purpose. It is an essential factor for developing both maturity and resilience. Hope is an essential component of our well-being. So, even the medical field recognizes that hope is essential to our well-being, right? So with addressing hope, we're going to talk about more of that next week. If you want to kind of like start doing some work, like say you have a situation right now in your life that you're like, this is a big thing and I don't really know how to address it. Like, how do I stop and like look at this? So going through like these 4 spheres and then even the 7 spheres of the wellness wheel is just a really good way to like slow down and see how a circumstance may be affecting different areas of your life, and then kind of help you compartmentalize like, what do I do in this area about the circumstance, and how do I move from, maybe these feelings of despair to where I can find hope and something to stand on. So we're going to end there for tonight. And if y'all have any questions, you're welcome to ask them now. So otherwise, thanks for coming. Yeah. Have a good one.